Many moons ago, a wise man once said, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." I believe Raptor Jesus claimed this. While I won't talk about the philosophical weight this quote has on a potentially crumbling civilization, I will say that taking time to think about previous events can be a good thing. It can be kind of fun to look back on a form of media and see just how far we have, or haven't, come. Since we are in a new decade, I feel like we should delve into the games of yesteryear. Join me as we go on a trip to explore the games of the 2010s, starting with the year 2010. Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? It's time to get off that couch and crack those fingers as we go back to a long-forgotten era on this episode of Gonzo Media.
Mommy? You're a mom? You?
Come now, Cheshire. Look at me. Do I look like I have any interest in children? Now making them, well, that's another story.
The decade started out with a bang with the release of Bayonetta, a character action game starring the Umbra Witch of the same name. Director Hideo Kojima, famous for his use of Twitter, claimed the game was made using the themes of sexiness and partial nudity. While I don't think that partial nudity really counts as a theme, Bayonetta still managed to be a good game. Having a big part of your character's power coming from a demon named Madama Butterfly comes with great effects. An example of this is how some of Bayonetta's charge attacks will actually cause some of Madama Butterfly's limbs to manifest into our reality. Using a charge attack related to Bayonetta's arms, for example, will cause a giant fist to swing through a portal and attack your enemies. While using a charge attack related to Bayonetta's legs will actually cause a foot to come down from the heavens, stomping on all of your foes. If you've ever had dreams of an attractive lady stepping on you, then Bayonetta is right up your alley. Sadly, like every other Platinum game out there, Bayonetta did not sell nearly as well as it should have. Thankfully, Bayonetta has received some good recognition throughout the years, and is actually getting a third entry sometime later this year exclusive to Nintendo Switch. Coincidentally, Darksiders was also released on the same day as Bayonetta. Even though it is the first title of a franchise that I frankly never played before, the first title's similarities to The Legend of Zelda has always interested me in some way. Plus, you can never really go wrong with a game that's heavily inspired by the Four Horsemen of the Apocalypse, even though Darksiders does take some artistic liberties about what the Four Horsemen are. The series seems to do well, as the franchise just got a new entry by the name of Genesis that was released last year in 2019. The original Darksiders has also gotten a re-release by the name of Darksiders Warforged Edition, which is easily accessible on any modern console. Hopefully, this will be a franchise that I try out before the end of this new decade. January 26th was a really good day for video games, as Mass Effect 2, No More Heroes 2, and MAG all saw a release on this day. Alongside all of these titles, the West finally received its Wii port of Tatsunoko vs. Capcom, which is one of the best fighting games on the Wii. Mass Effect 2 and No More Heroes 2 both are huge improvements to their original titles, with both games developing stronger characters, smoothing out the general gameplay, and also removed mechanics that just didn't work out as intended. Mass Effect 2 takes the cool but admittedly generic space opera-ness of the first title and turns it into a more dark but also serious experience. The most interesting thing about Mass Effect 2 though is that your choices in the first game have direct consequences to the events that play out throughout Mass Effect 2. This is a feature that I really wish more games would do, as I really enjoy knowing that my actions really have meaning and consequences on a more grand scale. No More Heroes 2 removed the open world hub area from the first game, and the title is a lot tighter of an experience because of that. Being able to quickly select the level you want to do really speeds up the game, and biking around Santa Destroy was never a fun experience anyway. It was always more of a way to just pad the game out instead of actually offering a good experience to the player, so it's an element that was definitely not missed. Desperate Struggle features even more wackier characters than the first, and even has returning fan favorites like Shinobi, who actually is a playable character in some sequences. The only real issue I had with the game is the final boss fight, which is utter garbage. So if you want to play the game like me and enjoy most of it and then just go on YouTube and watch someone else fight the boss for you, be my guest. Tatsunoko vs. Capcom is a hyper 2v2, unless you play one of the giant fighters, that crosses over characters from the two companies. This game actually introduced me to the company Tatsunoko, as even though I've heard of some of their series before, like Casherin, I never had an experience watching any of the shows before this game. Every fight is extremely colorful, and the huge damage indicator really adds to the experience of having heroes fighting other heroes. The fun and diverse roster is also a bonus, and everyone feels well made and are a lot of fun to play. The only downside to Tatsunoko vs. Capcom that I could find is that the anime Samurai Pizza Cats is not present in the game whatsoever. Totally a missed opportunity.
Samurai Pizza Cats. Right on! They're stamping out crime, and you know that ain't baloney. They're Speedy Cerviche, he's the leader of the bunch. That's right! A heck of a fighter, makes a heck of a lunch.
MAG might be the most obscure of these titles, as it was an online-only PS3 first-person shooter that was notorious at the time for being able to do matches with up to 265 players. That's more than 264 players! Visually and mechanically, MAG doesn't really offer you anything special. It was made during the dark periods of the early aughts where everything was just made into a murky brown color in an attempt to appear more realistic. Being able to play in a giant level with 264 other players made it all okay though, as it definitely made everything feel more alive. Unfortunately, the servers for MAG closed all the way back in 2014, and since the game was online only, it is now completely unplayable. It is now only to be enjoyed in our memories, in our hearts, in old playthroughs on YouTube.
For every choice, there is an echo. With each act, we change the world. One man chose a city, free of law and God. But others chose corruption, and so the city fell.
February 9th brought us the release of Bioshock 2 in Dante's Inferno. Bioshock 2 has an interesting departure from the first game by having you play as a Big Daddy as your main character. Interestingly enough, the Big Daddy that you play as has a head that reminds me of everyone's favorite explosive throwing madman, the White Bomber. Is it just me? Anyone else? Hard sell. Most of the gameplay in style is extremely similar to the first game. But since you play as a character that is essentially a giant drill, that concept makes the whole experience distinct enough to still feel fresh. Dante's Inferno was an okay action game that has the player descending through the 9 circles of hell. If you can't tell by the name, Dante's Inferno is based off the famous Italian epic Divine Comedy, but likely will not fare as well against the sands of time. The game plays very similarly to God of War, but lacks the same punch and brutality. There isn't really anything wrong with Dante's Inferno, but there are just games out there that do what it tries to do, but better. Dante's Inferno actually received more notoriety for its advertising than the actual merit of being a good game. EA at one point even paid people to act as protesters during E3 2009. Funny enough, this fake protest actually led to Christian bloggers posting in protest to a marketing protest. Protestception.
You know, we hope that it never comes to market. Let's just be honest with that. We hope that it never comes. That we hope this game never comes out. We hope that you know, people can never go to the store and buy this game because, you know, hell is not some sort of game that you could just go to and.
You made any games in the past that you guys are angry about?
You know, I can't say that.
There's definitely something in this town. You feel it, Zach? Coffee warned me. It said, Tomorrow you'll arrive in a place that will change your fate.
Deadly Premonition came slightly over a week later on February 17th, and actually holds the world record for most polarizing survival horror game. The game has you play a special agent Francis York as he travels to the sleepy town of Greenvale to investigate the murder of a young girl. If this sounds familiar to you, which it should, that's because Deadly Premonition is almost a scene-for-scene ripoff of Twin Peaks, even though developer Swery promises he never even seen the show before. Deadly Premonition is ugly, doesn't always play very well, and your objectives aren't even very clear at points. But I love this game just the same. Moving forward 6 days, we get to the release of Heavy Rain, David Cage's best pre-Detroit title. Though to be fair, that isn't saying very much. Deadly Premonition was another take on a more cinematic experience in a video game, which means there is very little actual gameplay outside of quick-time events designed to cushion the game's schlocky narrative that has to lie to you even to work as intended. Despite my general bitterness for Heavy Rain, I will say that being able to play the game through 4 distinct characters was very interesting, and the risk of losing one of those characters permanently due to the player making bad choices made every encounter a very tense experience. I wouldn't call Heavy Rain a good game, but I would say it was a step in the right direction for Mr. Cage.
A few weeks ago, after one of our usual sessions, I found this on the floor. It must have fallen out of his pocket.
March, while not carrying any heavy hitters, did have a lot of games that I personally enjoyed. March 9th brought us Western releases of both Yakuza 3 and Final Fantasy 13. Yakuza 3 is a great introduction to the Yakuza franchise, as it was the first Western release to actually include the original dialogue, keeping a more accurate tone to the original Japanese version. If you can't stand subtitles or simply hate reading, then you should probably stay away from the Yakuza games, as each game has a big supply of both. The only real issue with the Western release is that the game still had some content removed. A couple of optional content, such as hostess clubs and a Japanese trivia game, were removed because Sega thought the West just wouldn't understand them or would find them outright inappropriate. Corridor Simulator, Final Fantasy 13, is pretty much as linear as its reputation claims. It's such a shame too. The characters are entertaining and the combat was fun, and the game is very visually stunning. It just wasn't a good idea to have your RPG revolve around following a dot on a minimap with no real substance between them. At the end of the day, Final Fantasy 13 ended up being a flawed RPG that could never live up to the hype of people that wanted a more traditional Final Fantasy game. The trailers used to advertise and show off the game were super hype though.
My parents died. I had to be strong for Sarah, so I thought I needed to forget my past. And I became lightning.
March 14th brought us the second generation Pokemon remakes Heart Gold and Soul Silver. The updated graphics brought new life into a classic Game Boy game, and it was really cool to be able to have a Pokemon follow you out in the overworld on your adventures. The game also included the Pokewalker, a Pokeball clip-on device that was nothing more than a glamorized pedometer. I will say though, it was really enjoyable to take your favorite Pokemon on walks in order to gain more experience and pick up items, so I would never say that I was disappointed in it. What I am disappointed in though is that my Pokewalker was stolen when I was in high school, and I hope whoever stole it thought that Caterpie was worth it. Did that get too real? 2 days later was a heavy hitter with the releases of God of War 3, Resonance of Fate, Infinite Space, and Sam & Max The Devil's Playhouse. To be completely honest, I'm really not that familiar with the God of War series, besides how main character Kratos is famous for having a huge murder boner, but I've heard only good things about 3. Plus you can do this. That's pretty cool, right? A game known for its interesting take on Greek mythology and its intense level of bloodlust. What's not to love about it? Resonance of Fate was an odd Sega RPG that took place on a post-apocalyptic Earth and follows the adventures of a band of mercenaries. The The most interesting bit of Fate was the combat. Combat was done in an open arena where your characters had free movement and a set amount of attacks they could do. Attacking was interesting because you could either do damage directly, or you can shoot in order to stack potential hits in order to deal massive damage later on. I remember really liking the game when I played it, but I never really got too far in it. The combat mechanics were just a little too different and a little too janky for me to really wrap my head around. So I ended up dying a lot in combat before I just kind of rage quit and never got back to it. Resonance of Fate was a mixed bag, but if you enjoy RPGs with quirky combat systems, I'd recommend giving it a go. Infinite Space was an interesting space simulator developed by Platinum and released exclusively to the Nintendo DS. The game has you design and pilot your own spaceship, with battles taking place in real time. Instead of attacking manually, you rely on a command gauge that builds up over time and allows you to issue attacks once it fills up to a certain amount. Infinite Space, as the name implies, feels infinite, with a bunch of crew members to recruit and planets to explore. Infinite Space is definitely one of the more underrated gems for the Nintendo DS.
Mr. Pizza, I want an extra large thick crust with 1/2 peanut butter and passion fruit, the other half with watermelon only. Do you want cheesy dingles, Max?
You have to ask?
Okay, and 3 orders of cheesy dingles. Gouda. No, brie. Right. An extra fudge sauce. Okay, thanks.
How long till it gets here?
Probably never, Max. Nobody answered.
The Devil's Playhouse furthered the comedic adventures of freelance police Sam and Max. If you've never played a Sam & Max game, I totally recommend you checking them out. They are all really enjoyable point-and-click adventure games that will have you laughing from start to finish. Just be sure to have a guide ready, since some of the puzzles can be extremely obtuse. Devil's Playhouse is definitely the darker of the 3 seasons, and is probably the easiest to go back to as well. While I don't want to spoil it for anybody, the ending in the last episode is one of the best moments in the series. If you are curious as to what I mean, go check it out.
A Stinky should patch things up. Can't you see what it's doing to Max?
I hate it when they fight!
Oh, I don't think Grandpa Stinky is going to be a problem for much longer.
Intriguing!
I signed us up for relationship counseling and a business management seminar.
No.
March ended with a bang for weeaboo types, such as myself, with the release of Sakura Wars So Long My Love, the first title in the Sakura Wars franchise to be brought over to the West. The game is a dating sim tactical RPG set in an alternate version of the 20s where mechs are used to fight off evil monsters and other mechas. Similar to Persona 3 through 5, it's the social link aspect that is the most enjoyable, as the relationships you make throughout the game affect the synergy of your characters during combat. The better the synergy amongst yourself and the team, the better damage that you can dish out to your enemies. The ending and different encounters through the game are also based on your ranking amongst the cast, therefore adding a lot of replayability to the game. Sakura Wars So Long My Love is a great game and a franchise that still has almost zero presence here in the West, but hopefully with the release of the newest title, that will change sometime soon. Monster Hunter Tri was released for the Wii on April 20th and was a lot of people's first introduction to the monster hunting formula. I myself was one of those people, and so because of that alone, Monster Hunter Tri has a very special place in my heart. You go off on an adventure with up to 4 friends in order to fight and kill, or capture, giant monsters in order to forge better gear needed to fight bigger and nastier monsters. It may seem repetitive, and you could very easily make an argument about how the whole game is a grind, but the entire hunting for upgrades is a great gameplay hook that is able to keep a lot of people playing, including myself. If Monster Hunter sounds interesting, I'd actually recommend trying out Monster Hunter World over Tri. It's got a lot of quality of life improvements, and is the best way to experience the franchise up to this point. Exactly a week later, the world was gifted with Nier, a spin-off of the Drakengard series that was well known for its interesting story full of amazing twists. The game itself is just okay, with bland action RPG combat and admittedly interesting at points shmup sequences, but the story itself makes the slog of actually playing the game worth it. Thankfully, The gameplay was improved with the sequel Nier Automata, which was released a few years later. It helped that the game was designed by Platinum Games, a company well known for its fabulous gameplay. An interesting fact about Nier is that it was actually released as two different games in Japan. Nier Gestalt, which was the Xbox 360 version, and Nier Replicant, the PS3 version. It's very similar to how Pokemon releases two titles for each generation, with the games having some noticeable differences, but the plot and gameplay remaining the same. The version the West received was Gestalt, and featured a middle-aged Nier, while Replicant aged Nier down to a teenage boy. I guess developer Cavia thought it catered better to console audiences this way. May 18th brought us the releases of both Alan Wake and Red Dead Redemption, both of which were some of my favorite games of the year. Alan Wake is an action horror game that is heavily inspired by thriller television series. You play as the titular Alan Wake, a writer who takes a trip to a cabin with his wife Alice to help recover from writer's block. Quickly, you and the town of Bright Falls are attacked by the murderous Taken, a form of shadow that takes control over real people and turns them into murderous monsters. The Taken are generally invulnerable, but a quick blast of light makes them easily dispatchable with a bullet. It's actually really cool to play a game where things like flashlights and flares are really powerful weapons, and it really adds to the atmosphere that stoplights and streetlights not only help fend away creatures, but also act as a spot to quick save. You also have the option of collecting Alan Wake's manuscripts for a bit of world building, but trust me when I say looking for pages within a dark forest isn't exactly the best way to use your time. Overall, Alan Wake is a wonderful game, and is a very faithful adaptation of the genre that inspires it. Red Dead Redemption is an open-world western game developed by Rockstar, and is actually a sequel to the completely different Red Dead Revolver. You play as John Marston, a former outlaw who tries to turn away from his criminal lifestyle to go to a simple farm life with his wife and son. Unfortunately, the American government has other plans, and kidnaps John's family and offers their return only if John captures his former gangmates. I've actually heard people describe Red Dead Redemption as Grand Theft Auto, where you steal horses instead of cars, and that's a pretty accurate claim. You ride your horse around western landscapes where you can live out any western fantasies like robbing trains, shooting varmints, and gambling over a friendly game of horseshoes. Red Dead Redemption was a game that was done as a vanity project for the studio, and I'm glad it received the acclaim that it deserved. Red Dead Redemption is definitely one of the best games of 2010. Super Mario Galaxy 2 was released 5 days later on May 23rd, and is an improvement over an already great game. Galaxy 2 features the same gameplay, but adds in more power-ups, bigger planets to explore and alien races to meet, and it even brought in everyone's favorite dino Yoshi. The hub world in Super Mario Galaxy 2 is actually in the shape of Mario's head, and it's very cute. And it's actually really cool to see all of the passengers that join you as you continue throughout the game. Super Mario Galaxy 2 earned almost universal acclaim when it was released, and still holds up extremely well 10 years later. The only real downside to the game is that it doesn't have the same storybook elements in the first Galaxy game, but that doesn't keep it from being one of the best games of 2010. We are now going to jump over to June 27th for the release of Crime and Punishment: Star Successor, a sequel for a Japanese exclusive Nintendo 64 game. Crime and Punishment is an on-rail shooter for the Wii and stars a character named Isa Joe, who happens to be the child of the main characters of the first game. The story isn't much to write home about, being kind of generic anime fare, but it's all about the gameplay with this game anyway. It's full of blasting giant monsters in the face while dodging their large array of attacks. Crime and Punishment: Star Successor isn't the most difficult bullet hell game in the world, but it does have its moments of difficulty. Plus, it's always fun to build modifiers and watch big numbers go up. I was actually a really big fan of the original Crime and Punishment when it was available for the Wii's Virtual Console, and I'm really glad that it received a sequel that it deserved. 2 days later was the release of one of the more infamous games of the year.
Naughty Bear.
Oh, it's not that kind of naughty? My bad. This is a game all about violence and killing as many of the cutesy teddy bear denizens in elaborate ways within the allotted time limit. What in theory is a nice concept featuring the juxtaposition of cuteness and violence, in reality is a clunky title that just feels unfinished.
Naughty Bear.
Just isn't that fun to play to begin with, and its repetitive nature just makes the whole thing feel like work. Watching the Game Grumps play
Naughty Bear
is a good way to experience the monotonous of
Naughty Bear
without even having to touch the game. The visually stunning indie darling Limbo was released on July 21st. In Limbo, you play as an unnamed boy on a quest to find his sister within a black and white world where everything is out to kill him. Limbo is a game based on trial and error where you are expected to die again and again and again as you try to find the right way to get over obstacles. The game definitely leans more on the puzzle side of things instead of the platformer, which definitely adds to the title's unique identity. Journalists compare Limbo to film noir in German expressionism, and what's not to love about those things? Scattered throughout August was different console releases of Scott Pilgrim vs. the World: The Game, a video game based on the movie that was based on the comic book that takes place in a video game. Scott Pilgrim is a beat-em-up that was designed to resemble the comic book and has you travel around the mystical city of Toronto on your quest to defeat Ramona's 7 evil exes. You get to pick between 4 characters, 7 including the secret unlockable and the 2 DLC characters, each of which has different abilities. The game is really fun to play and features a wonderful soundtrack done by the band Anamanaguchi. Unfortunately, unless you were lucky enough to purchase the game before the end of 2014, the game is no longer available. Truly a bad end for such a great game. August also brought us the interesting release of Ivy the Kiwi on the 24th. Ivy was famous for being a project by Yuji Naka, the lead designer for the original Sonic the Hedgehog games. As you can tell by the 0 other Ivy the Kiwi titles released in the last decade, the IP never had the same appeal as Yuji Naka's earlier work. The game plays just like Kirby Canvas Curse, where you don't actually control Ivy, but instead create platforms and interact with objects while Ivy constantly moves forward. It is really surprising to see how far this game went under the radar, considering the legacy of Yuji Naka's previous work. I guess it goes to show you just how being a big name in the video game industry isn't enough to make your new game a success. Ultimately, the game is average at best, but it does look really cute, and maybe that is enough of a reason for some people to pick it up. The month of August sadly ended on a low note with the release of Metroid Other M, the worst Metroid game ever made. The gameplay itself was fine, with Team Ninja actually doing a good job at putting some more melee-based combat into a series that usually consisted of just projectiles. But the game ultimately falls apart in both its plot and the characterization of Samus. Instead of being a powerful female protagonist, Other M just makes her incredibly whiny, and the game is full of boring cutscenes that just drag on. I appreciate the attempt at trying to expand the Metroid universe with a more cinematic experience, but Other M was not the right way to do it. It also is almost anti-feminist, showing us the mighty Samus is only powerful when men allow her to be so. The game does have its fans, but to me, Other M was one of the most disappointing games of 2010.
Somewhere out there, there's this tree with star-shaped fruit, and the fruit represents an unbreakable connection. So as long as you and your friends carry good luck charms shaped like it, nothing can ever drive you apart. You will always find your way back to each other.
Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep was released on September 7th and is a pretty okay entry in the franchise. The game takes place years before the story of the first game. It follows the adventures involving 3 main playable characters, Terra, Ventus, and Aqua. Having intertwining stories was actually really interesting, and the game is one of the darker games in the entire Kingdom Hearts franchise and features a tragic story between a group of friends. Unfortunately, since each character has their own campaign, You basically end up playing through the entire game 3 times to get the true ending. And the actual criteria you have to meet to get to this true ending isn't exactly obvious to the player. Birth by Sleep also uses command slots instead of the normal magic or special abilities you use in the main games. Essentially, throughout the game you unlock a set of commands that you can put on your slot, and putting them on your slot allows you to use them during combat or while you roam around the worlds. The problem with command slots is some of your commands are very overpowered, so at the end of the game you essentially are using the same set of commands for every character, and it trivializes a lot of the combat. Birth by Sleep is a fun game when played in small bursts, which makes it an excellent game for a handheld. But if you're looking for something that you can put a lot of hours into in one sitting, then Birth by Sleep is probably not the game for you.
What? You know Terra and Aqua? Friend. Circle.
The next day, we saw the release of the now classic survival horror game Amnesia: Dark Descent. It's a first-person title where you wander throughout the floors of a castle as you try to avoid scary monsters while solving puzzles. Not only do you have a health bar, but a sanity bar as well. The sanity bar is somewhat familiar to the sanity mechanic that is used in Eternal Darkness, where it being low causes hallucinations that have an effect on the gameplay. Your sanity is restored by the power of light, but being in the light makes the player more likely to get ganked by monsters. Managing your time spent in the light and darkness is the only way to get through this horror gem. Amnesia is a game that holds up very well. Just remember to turn the lights off while you play it. You have to go for the full atmospheric experience with this one. While we in the West wouldn't get the game until a year later, Pokemon White and Black actually released in Japan September 18th. If you have played any of the other Pokemon games, then you already know what to expect. You go around the island competing in illegal cockfights as you try to be the region's #1 champion. While a lot of people complain about the designs of Pokemon outside of the first gen, I thought White and Black brought some interesting Pokemon to the series. I mean, who doesn't love Snivy, a snake Pokemon that lives to forever judge you? Black and White was also the first game in the franchise to take place on an island inspired by a country other than Japan, with Unova being based on New York City. Black and White also features a more serious story that is based on a game intent on freeing Pokemon with the belief that battles are immoral and Pokemon are abused. This darker story was received well by a lot of players, including myself, and was definitely a big departure from the usual plot of the previous games. Black and White is one of the best Pokemon generations, and I look forward to the eventual remake. The spoopy month of October brought us the release of Sonic the Hedgehog 4 Part 1. Sega, noticing the trends of games being released in an episodic format, decided to replicate it with the new release of Sonic the Hedgehog. And as you can tell, since their use of that episodic formula in other games, or the lack thereof, it didn't exactly go all that well for them. The game was released on October 11th, and was intended to act as a continuation of the gameplay featured from the first 3 core Sonic the Hedgehog titles. The entire game is just okay, and overall just feels worse than the original Sonic games that inspired it. For some reason, Sonic does not feel like he has a lot of weight behind him, to the point that the game feels absolutely floaty. The game also suffers from some pretty bad level design, to the point where there really isn't any memorable level whatsoever. I actually appreciate Sega trying to take this kind of episodic approach to Sonic. It's just a shame that you're better off replaying the older Sonic games if you want the classic experience. The Scariest Game of the Year was released on October 17th, and the game's name was Kirby's Epic Yarn. Underneath that pink yarny exterior is an eldritch abomination that wants to devour the world.
Ladies and gentlemen, due to operating difficulties, there's been an interruption.
There's so much charm in Epic Yarn that you can't help but love it. The entire game looks like a project your grandmother would do with yarn and felt, and the music is always on point here. The game includes a bunch of varied environments, and definitely takes advantage of its art style. The game suffers the same issue with other Kirby games in that it is too easy for its own good, with the only penalty for dying is losing gems, but it doesn't really hinder the excellent journey provided by Epic Yarn. It has a really fun co-op mode too, so it's definitely a good game to pull out when the family comes over during the seasonal holiday. To get that saccharine taste out of the world's mouth, 2010 brought us Fallout New Vegas on October 19th. The game brings you to another 50s inspired futuristic Fallout landscape based in Las Vegas. So gambling is a good way to spend and quickly lose all of your bottle caps. You control a player-created post-apocalyptic paperboy who ends up taking a bullet in the brain during a delivery. Your main mission begins with you trying to figure out who tried to kill you, an objective that quickly gets pushed aside for the vast array of side quests. New Vegas is a huge improvement over Fallout 3, and is closer to the tones of the original Fallout games as well. My only real issue with the game is that, like most Bethesda titles, Fallout New Vegas is riddled with bugs, some of which are game-breaking. Thank God for the company's supportive modding community, as many of their games would be almost unplayable without them.
Oh, ain't you glad? And they sing, oh, ain't you glad? And that song is so very far from wrong.
Fable 3 was released near the end of the month, having a release date of October 26. While I enjoyed the game a lot, I can't pretend how polarizing of an experience it really is. Being able to have control on playing either a good or evil character has always been the best parts of Fable, and the game doesn't disappoint in that regard. But the game does bring in some new mechanics that never really felt fleshed out. Weapons changing based on how you play is a really fun concept, but it never reached a point where I felt trying to grind out your weapons was really worth it. Being able to buy, repair, and rent out the property was pretty enjoyable, but it too feels overly simplified. Out of the first 3 Fable games, Fable 3 definitely feels the least focused. It's not a bad game by any means, but Fable 3 is sometimes an experience that leaves much to be desired. Call of Duty Black Ops was the first noticeable release of November, being pushed out on the 9th. Just like all the other Call of Duties, Black Ops is a brown, faux realistic military shooter that was famous for its online multiplayer modes. The game is fine, it plays well, is well made visually on a technical level, and is a lot of fun to play with friends, but I just don't care about it all that much. I'm not a huge fan of the series in general though, so I'm really not the best person to ask about its quality. While good at its time, I'm not really sure if it warrants going back to, considering all of the quality of life improvements that I assume are in the newer titles. November 2010 also gives me an opening to talk about one of my favorite series, Zero Escape. The first in the series, 999, was technically released first in Japan in 2009, but I'm going to take advantage of the fact that this is my show and talk about it anyway. 999 is part thriller visual novel, part puzzle game where you and 8 other people are trapped in what appears to be the sister ship of the Titanic. The, gigantic. Original, I know. All of the characters are equipped with explosive collars for forced cooperation, and also have a number associated with them. Rooms in the ship are assigned numbers, and only a group of people whose numbers equal up to the rooms are allowed entrance. It's a game of fun characters, dark stories, and a multitude of endings. I can't recommend it enough.
Retro Studios in Texas has produced some great Metroid titles. But when they said they were ready for something new, we asked them to take one of the most treasured franchises in video game history and to make it magic again. If you listen, you can hear it coming.
November 21st brought us Donkey Kong Country Returns, which was developed by Retro Studios. I was originally cautious and worried it would not hold up to the original titles that were created by Rare, so I was incredibly happy when I learned my cautions were not needed. Returns is the perfect example of a game revival. It features the same design and gameplay of the original titles, while also modernizing the experience in a way that makes sense. Diddy Kong acting as a jetpack when rescued in the single player mode is great. Both of them being playable at once during co-op is greater. Retro is also very unforgiving with its difficulty, and I would say Returns is more difficult than the first 3 Donkey Kong Country games. It's a shame that the Kremlins didn't return as well, but I guess you can't always get what you want. last game I will talk about also took place during November. Sorry December, you just didn't have anything I was knowledgeable enough or care enough to talk about. Warren Spector's Epic Mickey was released on November 30th, and I'm still not quite sure what to think of it. The game's original grimdark concept was amazing, but realistically was never going to happen, so we are left with a competent 3D platformer that honors underappreciated Disney properties and characters. Oswald the Lucky Rabbit, who essentially was a proto-Mickey Mouse, was actually retrieved to Disney just to be brought back for Epic Mickey. Your choices of being able to toggle between paint and thinner was a good way to manage a bit of a morality system. It's just a shame that the original idea of having Mickey's design change based on your actions got tossed out. The game features the same camera issues that have plagued almost every 3D platformer since the beginning, but outside of that glaring issue, there is nothing honestly that bad about Epic Mickey. I just wish it was more like the original idea, instead of the way more child-friendly product we received. Thank you all for watching this first episode in what I hope to be a 9-part series that covers all of the main games released within the last decade. Hopefully I'll release all of them in the same year too! I would like to apologize for any games that I may have missed. I tried to cover a wide amount of them, but with so many releases, some even undocumented, it's pretty hard to cover every single game released within a year. What was your favorite game of 2010? What was your least favorite? Let me know in the comments below. As always, if you liked this episode, please like and subscribe. Every little bit helps me out a lot. Thank you for watching, and I hope you all have a wonderful day.